Last month, my girlfriend Mia suggested we go on a double date with her coworker Jessica and Jessica's new boyfriend Tyler. I was hesitant at first. I'm not great with new people, but Mia insisted it would be fun. We planned to meet at Bellini's, this upscale Italian place in the suburbs that had just opened. Mia mentioned that Jessica had recently gotten out of a long relationship with some guy named Eric who worked at the same marketing firm. She didn't share many details, just that it had been a messy breakup and Jessica was excited to move on. We arrived at Bellini's around 7:30. The hostess seated us at a corner booth, dark wood tables, leather seats, and these pendant lights that cast everything in a warm glow. Jessica and Tyler were already there, halfway through their first drinks. Tyler seemed nice enough, worked in IT, into rock climbing, laughed at my terrible jokes. About halfway through dinner, I noticed Jessica kept glancing toward the bar area. When I looked over, I didn't see anything unusual, just the typical Saturday night crowd. I didn't think much of it until I went to use the restroom and passed by a guy sitting alone at the bar, nursing a whiskey and staring intently at our table. In the bathroom, I was washing my hands when someone else walked in. Through the mirror, I recognized him as the guy from the bar. He stood at the sink next to me, not washing his hands, just standing there. "You're with Jessica, right?" he asked, his voice eerily calm. My stomach dropped. I mumbled something about needing to get back to my table and tried to move past him, but he shifted slightly, blocking my path. "Tell her Eric says hello." The way he said it made my skin crawl. I pushed past him and hurried back to our table, my heart racing. When I returned, I whispered to Mia about what happened. Jessica overheard and immediately tensed up. "He's here?" she whispered, her face draining of color. Tyler put his arm around her protectively as she explained that Eric had been texting her constantly since the breakup. She'd blocked his number, but he'd started using different phones. She'd even filed a report with HR at work. Tyler suggested we leave immediately, but Jessica was worried that would only provoke Eric. We decided to finish our meal quickly and leave together as a group. The restaurant parking lot was poorly lit, with just a few overhead lamps casting pools of yellow light on the wet asphalt. It had started drizzling while we were inside. We walked in pairs, Tyler and Jessica ahead, Mia and me following about 10 feet behind. I kept glancing back toward the restaurant entrance, half expecting to see Eric following us. Nothing. We reached Tyler's car first, parked near the back of the lot. As Jessica reached for the door handle, I noticed a flicker of movement between the cars parked nearby. Tyler suddenly swore loudly. Someone had broken his key off in the driver's side lock. Jessica immediately began scanning the parking lot, her breathing becoming rapid and shallow. "He's here," she whispered. Tyler pulled out his phone to call the police, but there was no signal. My car was parked on the other side of the lot, so we decided to make a run for it. As we turned to leave, the overhead lights in the parking lot suddenly went out, plunging us into darkness. In the darkness, I could barely make out the shapes of the parked cars. We moved slowly, Tyler guiding Jessica by the hand, me doing the same with Mia. The only light came from distant street lamps at the lot's entrance. "Stay together," I whispered, my voice sounding too loud in the silence. We'd made it about halfway to my car when we heard footsteps on the wet pavement behind us. Unhurried, deliberate. Tyler pushed Jessica toward me and whispered, "Get them to the car. I'll distract him." Before I could protest, he was jogging in the opposite direction, calling out, "Hey, Eric, over here." We reached my car, fumbling with the keys in the dark. Once inside, I locked the doors and started the engine. My hands shaking so badly I could barely grip the steering wheel. Jessica was sobbing quietly in the back seat. Through the rain-streaked windshield, I couldn't see Tyler anywhere. "We can't leave him," Mia said, her voice breaking. I turned on the headlights, illuminating a section of the parking lot. Nothing. I honked the horn twice, hoping to signal Tyler. That's when my phone rang, an unknown number. I answered on speaker. "If you want to see your friend again, drive home and don't call the police," Eric's voice said coldly before hanging up. We drove straight to the police station instead. The officers took our statements and immediately dispatched units to the restaurant. They found Tyler 3 hours later, unconscious in the trunk of Eric's car with a concussion and a broken arm. Eric had apparently been planning this for weeks. Police found detailed notes in his apartment about Jessica's schedule, her new boyfriend, even the restaurant reservation. They also found rope, duct tape, and printed directions to a remote cabin he owned in the mountains. The trial is next month, and we're all scheduled to testify. Tyler's recovered physically, but Jessica still jumps whenever her phone rings. I've installed security cameras at our apartment, and Mia and I take turns checking that the doors are locked before bed. The police assured us that with the evidence they found, Eric will be put away for a long time. But I'm in a parking lot at night. I find myself scanning the shadows between cars, listening for footsteps on wet pavement, unable to shake the feeling that someone is watching, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. My roommate Morgan convinced me to try a dating app after my breakup with Alex. I'd been single for 6 months and spent most weekends at home scrolling through Netflix. After matching with David, we messaged for about 2 weeks before agreeing to meet at Reverie, a coffee shop downtown that turns into a wine bar after 5 p.m. His profile said he worked in finance, enjoyed hiking, and volunteered at an animal shelter. He seemed normal enough in our messages, asked thoughtful questions, made decent jokes, didn't immediately try to steer the conversation towards sex. We agreed to meet on a Wednesday evening after work. I arrived 15 minutes early and grabbed a table near the back. David showed up right on time, looking mostly like his profile pictures, slightly shorter than I expected, but well-dressed in a blue button-down and dark jeans. The first half hour went fine. He talked about growing up in Seattle, his job at an investment firm, his German shepherd named Apollo. But something felt off. He kept checking his phone, cutting me off mid-sentence, and asking oddly specific questions about my apartment building and whether I lived alone. When I mentioned my roommate, his expression changed for just a second. A flash of annoyance quickly covered by a smile. He excused himself to use the restroom, and I used the opportunity to text Morgan. Date weird, might leave early. When David returned, he suggested ordering a bottle of wine. I declined, saying I had an early meeting the next day. His smile tightened. Just one glass, he insisted, already waving the server over. I reluctantly agreed to a half glass, which I barely touched. The conversation deteriorated as David started complaining about his ex-girlfriend, how she'd misunderstood him, how the restraining order was completely unnecessary, how she'd overreacted to a few texts. My internal alarms were blaring. I excused myself to the bathroom and called Morgan, who didn't answer. I sent another text, definitely leaving. Guy talking about restraining order from ex. In the bathroom, I splashed cold water on my face and debated my options. The bar was fairly crowded. I could ask the bartender for help, or simply tell David I wasn't feeling well and leave. I decided on the latter, rehearsing the words in my head. When I returned to our table, David had already paid the bill. "Ready to go?" he asked, standing up. I thanked him for the evening, but explained I wasn't feeling a connection and would be heading home alone. His expression hardened. "Let me at least walk you to your car," he insisted. "It's dark out." I refused as politely as possible, explaining my car was just in the garage next door. He seemed to accept this, nodding curtly before walking toward the exit. I waited 15 minutes before leaving, scanning the street as I exited. No sign of David. The parking garage entrance was just across the street from Reverie. It was one of those older downtown structures, 7 levels of concrete spiraling upward, with flickering fluorescent lighting and security cameras that looked like they hadn't been updated since the 90s. My car was on level 4. The garage was eerily quiet as I made my way up the stairs, my footsteps echoing off the concrete walls. I had my keys in my hand, thumb poised over the panic button, scanning each corner as I emerged onto the 4th level. The 4th floor was nearly empty, just a few cars scattered across the vast expanse of concrete. Mine was parked near the far corner, away from the elevators and stairs. As I walked toward it, I heard the stairwell door close softly behind me. I glanced back, but didn't see anyone. Still, the hairs on my neck stood up. I picked up my pace. The click of my boots against concrete suddenly too loud in the silent garage. When I was about 20 feet from my car, I heard footsteps behind me, unhurried, deliberate. I turned to see David walking toward me, hands in his pockets, that tight smile back on his face. "Fancy meeting you here," he said, voice echoing. My mind raced. How did he know which garage, which level? I gripped my keys tighter and continued toward my car, trying to keep my voice steady as I said, "I'm just leaving. Good night, David." He quickened his pace, closing the distance between us. "Why'd you lie to me?" he asked, his tone conversational but edged with something dangerous. I thought we had a connection. I reached my car and fumbled with the key fob, my hands shaking. Before I could unlock it, David was beside me, grabbing my wrist. "Let's talk in my car instead," he said, pulling me toward a black sedan parked 2 spaces away. I yanked my arm away and pressed my car's panic button. The alarm blared through the concrete structure, lights flashing. David's face contorted with rage. He lunged at me, but I sidestepped, dropping my purse as I sprinted toward the elevator bank. I could hear him behind me, his footsteps pounding on the concrete. The elevator was too far. I veered toward the stairwell instead, crashing through the heavy door. I took the stairs 2 at a time, nearly falling in my haste. Behind me, the door slammed open again. "You're making this worse," David shouted, his voice bouncing off the concrete walls. I reached the ground level and burst through the door, straight into the garage's security office. The guard looked up, startled by my panic. Between gasps, I explained someone was chasing me. He immediately radioed for backup and locked the office door. On the security monitors, we watched David emerge on the ground floor, look around frantically, then duck back into the stairwell. The guard called the police while I huddled in the corner, shaking uncontrollably. When they arrived 15 minutes later, they found David sitting in his car on level 4, my driver's license in his hand. In his trunk, they discovered rope, duct tape, and a stun gun. At the police station, I learned David wasn't even his real name. His actual name was Paul Mercer, and he had a history of stalking charges in 3 different states. He'd used the dating app to target at least 4 other women. The detective showed me screenshots from his phone. He'd saved all our conversations, researched where I worked, even driven by my apartment building multiple times. The most chilling part was finding out he'd been following me for days before our date, learning my routines. He knew exactly which garage I used because he'd watched me park there earlier that week. That was 6 months ago. Paul is awaiting trial for attempted kidnapping and various stalking charges. I've moved to a secured building with a doorman. I've changed my routines, deleted all my social media, and started taking self-defense classes. Morgan and I have an elaborate system of check-ins whenever either of us goes on a date. I still wake up in the middle of the night, certain I hear footsteps in the parking garage. The detective told me I was lucky, that my instincts possibly saved my life. But I don't feel lucky. I feel forever changed, constantly looking over my shoulder, wondering who might be watching me right now. I matched with Andrea on Hinge back in January. We messaged for a few weeks before agreeing to meet at Embers. I work as a graphic designer at a marketing firm, and she's a physical therapist at the university hospital. We're both in our early 30s, both recently out of long-term relationships, both ready for something new. I made a reservation for 7:30 on a Friday, figuring the weekend crowd would create a lively atmosphere. I arrived 15 minutes early and was led to a corner booth toward the back of the restaurant. Smooth upholstered seats, sleek glass-top tables, and these artsy light fixtures casting a warm glow over everything. Andrea arrived right on time, looking like her profile pictures, Wavy brown hair, green eyes, smart casual in a blazer and jeans. The conversation flowed naturally as we ordered drinks and appetizers. We discovered mutual interests in hiking and obscure documentaries, laughed about our dating app horror stories, and shared our ambitions for the future. The booth beside ours remained empty for the first hour of our date, which was surprising for a Friday night. Around 8:45, two men in expensive-looking suits were seated there. They seemed tense, barely acknowledging the server. I didn't pay them much attention. I was too busy enjoying my conversation with Andrea. Our entrees arrived shortly after the men were seated. The restaurant had these decorative dividers between booths, not solid walls, but these metal lattice screens with frosted glass that provided a sense of privacy while still letting ambient sound through. I was mid-story about a camping trip gone wrong when I heard one of the men say something that made me pause. "The shipment arrives Tuesday. We need to make sure the problem from last time doesn't happen again." His voice was low but clear. The other man responded, "That's why I took care of Martinez. Too many questions." I glanced at Andrea, wondering if she'd heard it too. The look on her face confirmed she had. We tried to resume our conversation, but it was clear we were both distracted. I cut into my steak, trying to make sense of what we'd overheard. Could be nothing. Business talk, movie quotes, inside jokes. But something about their tone felt wrong. The men ordered whiskey neat and continued their conversation in hushed tones. I caught fragments. Warehouse by the docks, disposal methods, clean records. Andrea excused herself to use the restroom, and I noticed one of the men watching her leave. When she returned, she slid a napkin across the table with a note. "Think we should leave?" I nodded subtly. I asked for the check, trying to appear casual. As we waited, I heard the men discussing someone named Collins who might become a problem. Then one of them said something that made my blood run cold. "Those two in the next booth have been quiet for a while. Think they heard anything?" The other man responded, "Take a picture just in case." I felt my heart rate spike. The server brought our check, and I fumbled with my credit card, trying not to show how badly my hands were shaking. Andrea kept her composure, sipping her water and maintaining eye contact with me, but I could see the fear behind her smile. We left as naturally as possible, stopping at the coat check to retrieve Andrea's jacket. In the reflection of the mirror behind the counter, I saw one of the men watching us from his booth. Outside, the night air was cool against my flushed face. "Let's share an Uber," Andrea suggested, already pulling out her phone. As we waited under the restaurant's awning, I glanced back through the windows and saw the two men paying their bill. "They're leaving," I whispered to Andrea. Her eyes widened. "Cancel the Uber," I said. "Let's take a cab instead." I flagged down a passing taxi, and we climbed in quickly. In the taxi, we debated what to do. "Should we call the police?" Andrea asked. "And tell them what?" "That we overheard a vague conversation?" I countered. Still, something felt deeply wrong. I suggested we go to my friend's bar downtown instead of either of our places. Somewhere public with people we knew. Through the rain-streaked window, I noticed a black SUV that seemed to be following our taxi. When we turned left, it turned left. When we changed lanes, it changed lanes. "I think we're being followed," I told Andrea, trying to keep my voice steady. She looked back and confirmed my suspicion. We had the taxi drop us at a busy intersection, then quickly ducked into a crowded department store and exited through another door. We hurried 6 blocks to my friend Miguel's bar, constantly checking over our shoulders. The bar was packed, Friday night crowd in full swing. Miguel was working behind the counter and immediately noticed our distress. In the back office, we explained what happened. Miguel suggested we call his cousin, a detective with the city police. While we waited, I checked social media on my phone and discovered something chilling. I had a new follower request on Instagram from an account created that day. The profile picture was blurry, but I recognized the suit. Miguel's cousin, Detective Reyes, met us at the station at midnight. He took our statements seriously, especially after we mentioned the name Martinez. Apparently, a local business owner named Diego Martinez had been found dead in his car 3 days earlier, officially ruled a suicide. He showed us a photo array, and we both identified the men from the restaurant. They were brothers, Vincent and Thomas Palazzo, with suspected ties to organized crime but clean records. Detective Reyes arranged for patrol cars to check our apartments and advised us to stay somewhere else for the night. He also requested access to the restaurant's security footage. We checked into a hotel downtown using Miguel's credit card. Neither of us wanted to be alone, so we got a room with 2 beds. I kept thinking about how ordinary the evening had started, just 2 people meeting for dinner, and how quickly it had spiraled into something terrifying. In the morning, Detective Reyes called with updates. The restaurant footage confirmed the men had photographed us, and a search of Vincent Palazzo's vehicle had uncovered an unlicensed firearm and a notepad with what appeared to be our taxi's license plate number scribbled on it. They were bringing both brothers in for questioning related to Martinez's death. The Palazzo brothers were eventually charged with Martinez's murder, along with various drug trafficking offenses. Andrea and I spent 3 weeks in a safe house while the investigation proceeded, during which time we got to know each other far better than any normal dating trajectory would allow. I still check over my shoulder whenever I enter a restaurant. I've changed my phone number, moved apartments, and switched to working remotely whenever possible. The trial starts soon, and we'll both be testifying. Despite everything, Andrea and I are still together, bound by an experience neither of us could have imagined. I wonder what would have happened if we'd been seated at a different table that night, or if we'd chosen another restaurant entirely. One small change, and we might never have known how quickly an ordinary evening could transform into a nightmare.